I think you have unanimous agreement on that, Mr. Trone. Mr. Cloud. Mr. Guest, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to talk about the detention docket again. FY '21, roughly 3.7 million total on the detention docket. FY '22, it grew by 1 million to now roughly 4.7, slightly over 4.7. Based on what I've read and what I've heard, also it appears that for the first roughly half of FY '23, that has grown by another 600, and by the end of the year, assuming that things continue, the total number of individuals on the non-detention document will reach close to 6 million, which is a huge increase over the last 2 years. And so as we've seen a growing increase in the non-detention docket, of that, we know that 1.2 million on that detention docket, at least at the end of FY '22, had final orders of removal. And correct me if I'm wrong, but a final order of removal means that that case has been played out through the judicial system. An immigration judge has determined that that individual has no legal status to remain in the country. And that at that point, once that individual is encountered, that individual is to be removed from the country. So we know that at least of that, somewhere where we sit right now, 5.3 million, 1.2 million have already completed their legal proceedings. They have been ordered to be removed. And so as we see these numbers grow, whether it be on the non-detention docket, you know, we've seen that the number of removals, particularly going back from 2019, has decreased dramatically. 2019 removals were roughly 247,000. We know that the last 2 years, that number has hovered. I think last year was an increase from the year before. The year before, I think, was roughly 60,000. Last year, roughly 72,000. And so my question is we seem to be doing a worse job of removing people from the country at a time in which we have an increase in cases. And I want to ask, is that because you don't have the resources? Is that the policies that have been placed down? You know, I've been told that there were policies placed by this administration that unless an individual had been convicted of a crime, that we weren't to actually go out and enforce orders of removal. And if we've been asked not to enforce orders of removal, which are orders by a judge to go do something, I find that very problematic. And is the reason those numbers have dropped is because you've had to put all of your personnel on the southern border to address the surge, which has not gotten better, and after 42 goes away, will probably get worse. And so where is the disconnect? As we have more people on the non-detention docket, as we have more orders of removal, but the people that we're removing seems to not really be increasing and has decreased dramatically from the high in 2019. Please explain to me, Director, why we are not doing a better job of interior enforcement, particularly of those individuals whose cases have played their way out through the justice system.
Really good questions. I think that the reason for the drop in removals are threefold. I think it does have something to do with our focus on the southwest border and us deploying a lot of staff to the southwest border to deal with the flow. We have certainly used our planes and assets and resources to expel a lot of those folks that were coming across, and that certainly impacted our ability to put Title VIII removals on those planes and in those seats as we've historically done. I also think that, as I mentioned previously, that the bulk of our removals come from our detention setting. It's obviously much easier to move someone when they're in your physical custody.
And that gets back to my whole argument of why are we reducing detention beds if it is easier to remove people in detention. And I know we talked about it, whether it's in the primary budget or the contingency budget, but it shouldn't be in the contingency budget. If it's easier to remove people once they're in detention, and you've agreed with that, and I agree with that, but yet we have a budget which is actually shrinking detention beds. I find that counterproductive. And I'm not trying to be argumentative. This is something I'm extremely passionate about. I know that you are, and you're passionate about making sure that you're representing the men and women that you serve with. But to see this budget request by this administration, and to see a decrease in detention beds at a time in which we see a spike in every other number, I find that hard to justify. And I'm not, and I don't place this blame solely on you. I know that you didn't get to write this this budget without input of others, but the detention beds are a key component of that. And at the rate that we're going, when we're removing 72,000 out of 1.2 million, that's less than 5% a year. And so it's going to take 20 years just to remove the people that we have orders on. And as these additional cases work their way through the system, we're going to see those numbers grow exponentially. And it just doesn't seem to me that we either don't have the resources or we don't have the policies in place to enforce the law. And that's all we're asking. We're just asking the law be enforced. If there's an order of removal, that person be removed. And we're not enforcing the law. And unfortunately, your agency has been tasked with enforcing the law, and we're not doing that. And so I'm very concerned about that. And I hope that you can explain to us what you need in the form of resources, what you need in the form of detention beds, what you need in the form of technology. What can we provide you so that you and your agents can do the job that you're tasked to do? Because clearly you don't have the resources that you need. Clearly you don't have the manpower, you don't have the detention space, you don't have the technology. I mean, we just talked about the fact that we're allowing people in the country and we have no access to their criminal records from their country of origin. That's disturbing to me. It should be disturbing to all Americans that we're allowing people in the country and we have no idea what crimes they may have committed in their home country. And yet we're deciding whether those people are sent into detention, and we know they're very limited detention beds, or just released into the interior. And so what do you need from Congress? What do you need from us on the appropriation side that is going to allow you to enforce the law and do the job that you were created to do, you and your agency?
So as I mentioned, I think we definitely need additional officers and support staff to work the significant increase in the non-detained docket, which will probably double at the end of this year to close to 6 million if we were spitballing. I disagree. I don't think, as I've mentioned already, I think I do have access to those 9,000 beds. So in my mind, I think we're going to be, right around the 32 to 34,000 funding that we've historically had going into next fiscal year. And again, I'm hopeful that we'll actually be able to use beds like we have before COVID, where, when we started off in the beginning of the pandemic, we were only using 50% of our capacity because of social distancing requirement, all the mounds of litigation, and some of the the litigation and some of the social distancing requirements. Today we're at like 73% of our bed capacity, our bed use. Hopefully on May 11 we can get to the norm, which is typically around 88 to 93% of our capacity. So again, I think if that happens, you'll see more removals as a result of us just being able to use more of our detention capacity, and you won't see the Title 42 expulsions. There'll be all Title 8 removals, and I think we'll really be able to do an apples to apples comparison of where we were in 2019 compared to where we are now.
Thank you, Mr. Guest.